Hey, Kirk. Aloha, Mai. Awesome. Well, I am super excited about this topic, but I'm always excited about this topic. I could talk about data visualization and design anytime. It's definitely one of my favorites. For those who don't know, in addition to doing this work here, I've also do a good bit of consulting and writing and blogging around data visualization design, infographics, dashboards, and other kinds of design projects, reporting, report design, those kinds of things. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what I call UX data design. And it's really kind of the moniker I put on my own process of data visualization design. And I'm going to show you how we can use it to create useful infographics. All right. For those who don't know me, my name is Chris Lysy. I am, oh, that's why I didn't see the video because it was hiding behind my other panels. Now I see you, Kirk. Now I see you, Rachel. All right, there, no longer hiding. All right, so we're going to talk about infographics. I'm going to talk about the purpose, or at least what I call the purpose of most infographics in this reporting world. I'm going to show some examples, including a couple from some of your fellow community members here. I'm going to share my process and then talk about some tips and take some questions. But first, I am going to challenge you all, and we're going to do a little quiz. So it's not the kind of quiz that you need to study for, so it's okay if you haven't studied. And I'm going to ask, instead of just doing the chat, I just want you to, I'm going to give you two options. And I want you to pick the better option. There's going to be an option A and an option B. And all I want you to do is in the chat, I just want you to say A or B. And I'm going to not give you any more information than that. All right. Option A or option B? Okay, I'm seeing B, B, B. Okay, B, Stacy. Okay, Amber, B, B, B. Okay, I'm B, but it depends, Kirk. Okay, Dawn says B, A and B from May. Okay, that's nice. All right. Now we have another two. Option A, this beautiful little 3D pie slice, more like cheesecake chart, I guess. And then option B, and option B is an icon array. Okay, B, 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 cheddar graph. Oh, that is totally a cheddar graph. I like that. B, 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 okay. Now we'll do one more. Option A or option B? This one's harder. They're both from the same place. These are both New York Times graphics. Which do you like better? A or B? Everybody's being a little slower. Conrad, I think your volume's coming through. If you want to go on.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. All right. What question are we answering? Oh, I wonder, Kirk. Okay, B, 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 like the comparison. All right. No worries, Conrad. It happens to us all. A for big picture, B if small multiples are useful from Catherine. All right. If comparing, B. All right. Now we're going to step back because I rushed you through that. I just threw in some questions, some A's and B's, and gave you absolutely no context, which is totally unfair. And I could tell the evaluators in that are really, it was starting to get to that point where everybody's like, wait a second, there's something up with this, because that little evaluator sense was tingling, I think, for a number of you. So let's try this again. First, I want you to meet Sarah. Sarah is a chief nursing officer at a hospital in South Carolina. And we're designing a chart for her. So now I wonder, which option A or option B? In B, we have Pennsylvania's marriage rate versus divorce rate. And in option A, we have data about infant mortality in South Carolina. Which do you think? Wow, everybody said B the first time, but now everybody's saying A. That's amazing. All right, let's see. Now let's meet Rakesh. Rakesh is a data specialist in the Baton Rouge mayor's office. The last time everybody said B, but on the left we have Baton Rouge from January of 2021, so it's recent data. On the right we have Louisiana's unemployment rate from August of 2020, so it's even like mid last year. Well, A, exactly, the cheddar graph takes it on this one. All right, now yep, exactly. We might want to dive into that a little bit more. Exactly, maybe B would be useful to know Louisiana in total. Now let's meet Christina, and she's worried about her parents' risk of COVID. They live in West Virginia. So if she's going to the New York Times page, she would probably gloss over that overall look. I mean, probably look at a little, but the next one, the one that breaks everything out, will give West Virginia's numbers. So I'm going to guess she's going to go with B. Isn't it amazing what a little context will do? I find that a lot of these presentations, whether we're talking about charts or dashboards or anything, are almost completely out of context most of the time. You can take the worst chart but if it has the right data, it'll probably be more worthwhile than the best looking chart with the wrong data all the time. So I'm not advocating for you to use cheddar graphs, but I am advocating for you to ask the question, who is the person that we are trying to reach with our infographics, with our reports? So what is UX data design? It's what I call myself. I call myself a data designer. I call myself a user experience data designer. I bounce back and forth between doing design work and doing data work, even within this community of practice. It's probably how I pitched myself when I talked early on about launching this project, that it is a user experience process, a design process. So the UX data design is the process by which I put almost all of my work through these days. So what is it? Well, the knee-jerk response is bringing data to the people, but I don't like that one, because I think bringing data to the people is more of the role of a data journalist or a researcher. People, or maybe not even the researcher, because they're trying to build upon a body of work. Data journalist is trying to look for things that might be interesting to a big group of people and kind of share it out. I'd say from an evaluator's perspective, it's about bringing people to the data and bringing people to the data that they need the most. And that's what we're talking about today. More specifically, though, I'm talking about infographics today. So what are infographics? And I could go into a long explanation, try to capture everything that is an infographic, but it's kind of hard. Infographics kind of rolled out of the design world, early education literature, other kinds of reports. They've been around for, well over a century. Okay, there's been a lot more lately for digital reasons, but really, I just find that infographics are kind of this overlap between information and graphics. Or another way to put it, it's an infographic is just a poster with charts and pictures and other kinds of data. It tends to be. Don't overthink the what, because you'll get stuck there. The better question is why infographics, and why are we talking about them here, and why do I like them so much? The biggest reason is because we have large, diverse audiences. And if we're trying to report to a large, diverse audience with one report, we are going to fail all the time because our audience is not one audience. Even those little audiences, even the audiences that we think are one audience, are rarely ever one audience. There are many different types of learners in the room. There are many different types of people and how they interact with information. So if we roll out all of our stuff that we're trying to share into one report and one report only, we're going to miss a whole lot of people. It might be somewhere to go to. It's usually good to have one big report that we lead into. But if we want to try to adapt that report to an audience, we need to remember that we have many different people that we're trying to reach most of the time. Another piece of context is that the digital world, the one in which we live right now, is a visual world. So like if you wake up and you go to a news source like the New York Times or Washington Post or wherever you might go, you're going to find so many pictures on that website nowadays. And they're going to be cycling. Even on a text-heavy magazine, you're still going to find a lot of pictures nowadays. The same thing goes on social media. Social media is like one living infographic, all the time because visuals are such a big part. So early on, it used to be about Twitter and it's 140 characters when it started. But then once they started rolling in featured images, the characters were only really secondary to the pictures that went along with them. And that's still true. If you want to share something on social media, it's going to be shared with a picture. Shopping sites, you can't go to Amazon or anywhere else without seeing a ton of pictures. Sports sites, whether you're looking for recipes on Pinterest or you're looking for videos, you're going to be bombarded with pictures because pictures visualize and map out visually our digital virtual world. And then finally, which really is kind of the start to almost anything that I do, is that everyone is overwhelmed, just completely. There's so much information we're being bombarded with at almost all the time. So we have this thing where we just kind of shut down. So these are the people that we're dealing with. Um, I write a blog. I draw cartoons for that blog, and even then, you can tell if I have a little bit more words. I've asked people and I've asked questions about what people are doing when they're reading the blog. And it's like, well, I'm sitting on a train on the way to such and such, holding my phone, the baby in the other hand. Somebody else is in a library and the kids running around in circles and they're trying to read a blog post. Somebody's walking down the street. It's not like this is our audience. And it's not just blogs, it's everything. It's reports, it's all sorts of things. We have a distracted audience. And we can pretend that we don't have a distracted audience, like people have their 100% intention to give to our reports. Likely that's not the case most of the time. So for me, this is what infographics are. They're the things that allow us to tailor our communications to meet specific audience requirements. They were usually visual and pretty focused on delivering a specific message. And there's not just one way to create an infographic, but so many ways to create infographics. You'll see them now. It'll look more like slide decks or reports. The difference between what a report is and what an infographic is, it's kind of hard to say anymore. Difference between, you'll have videos, you'll have interactive things, you'll have things that we print out. So there's a whole range of things that we can call an infographic and probably be pretty accurate in our generic definition of what an infographic is. We make it more purposeful and say, well, it's only this, but I don't see a reason for that either. Here's an example. I'm going to zoom in. Don't worry about trying to scrunch your eyes so that you can see this. And just get the overall picture. And this is something I did for Oregon State University. This is a generic version because most of my stuff ends up being private in some way or form because data can't be shared outside the programs. A little bit of context. So Oregon's outdoor school, there are a number of different campsites that are part of it, and they have different performance measures that go along with this program. Originally, they send out reports to every single site. And with those reports, what they used to do is they used to really just kind of give them and their number and compare it to an average. Now, the challenge with averages is averages aren't as good as distributions. If you can give the whole distribution, people can see where they fall within that overall distribution sometimes. So that's what we tried to do here. And I think we were pretty successful. We have, if you look at the page, you'll see an outcome, and the little green dot is where their number would be, where they fall within the range. All the grayed out pieces is everybody else in the program. And then the little line is the average. So before they would only really see that line. They wouldn't see if they were an outlier or not. And we were able to do this and share it individually one by one because people couldn't identify who the other dots were, and it could stay private, that kind of thing. But it gave them a lot more context compared to just comparing against the average. It was designed so that people could see and compare themselves with each other. And that's kind of one of the purposes of what they were really trying to accomplish. Now let's go to another one. So I used to work at a company called WestEd on a lot of education work. And one of the education projects I worked on was a IDEA data center. So data center for special ed data. And this is one of the infographics I created. You'd have to squint. You don't have to. I'm going to click forward. But the overall piece is it's actually an interactive one. So this would sit on the website. And what we were trying to do with this is to essentially create a menu where we can walk them through the narrative. And then when they get to a spot like they want to see the individual files that they needed, this was geared towards states, and they needed to pull certain data sets and different background information for these different indicators and pieces and files. But you would go down here and it would pop up and you'd be able to click on any of these little buttons and you'd all of a sudden get all the background data that you could download. So the infographic then became the actual interface. And that was another fun one too, because these kinds of things oftentimes would just be kind of like a huge list of files that are Excel files that you would download. But it didn't really give you any context and it was hard to understand what you were looking at in the first place. This way we could walk the person who's experiencing what we're trying to do. We can use this infographic format to be able to tell them a story and walk them to the point that they could see this stuff. Now, I am going faster than I thought, but that's okay. Shu, are you on the call? And if not, I'll come back to...
Yes. Hi, Chris. I'm here.
Hi, Shu. This is Shu from New York. Shu, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone.
So, Shu, can you tell me a little bit about this infographic that you sent to me earlier today?
Yes. So for this infographic, oh, sorry. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
now it's good.
sorry.
No worries.
Yes, for this data graph, actually it's the 5th edition. That's what we created for the New York State Law Enforcement Naloxone Program. The program started in 2014, and then we got a lot of great data, and it's a great collaboration between DOH and DCJS, and also OmniMed, the hospital, the medical community. And then after we got the data, we're very interested in finding a way to share the information with this very diverse audience. It's not, the typical like DOH audience we deal with. And then we try to develop this infographic, like one pager to share the highlights from the program, and then to share like some of the lessons we learned from the program. It was very well received by the audience, and it's also shared in the DOH website. So it's like approved for the general public as well. And so that's why we've been updating this one pager every year for like 5 years.
Mhm.
One of the challenges we experience with this is everyone likes this, and all the program asked us to develop a similar product for their program. We got a lot of requests, and then uh, because we're like evaluation specialists, and we're not really graphic designers, so we set it up in publisher and we use some other tools. So we found it's really time consuming to produce something like this. So that's why I'm very curious about what tools, what like resources you may have to make producing something like this more effective.
I can imagine if you have it in Publisher, only probably certain people on your team can use it too, right? And so
Yes.
sometimes that can create a little bit of a bottleneck.
Yeah.
Um, and but I mean, you said you get positive results, people like it, and other people have seen this kind of thing and requested it more.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that was on the website, which I think is another point I wanted to bring up about these in general, is that when you have infographics, because they're visual, if you have a social media team, if you have web developers or others within your state departments, they love having visual stuff. And if you really want to share your evaluation stuff via certain state channels, having something visual like an infographic usually helps you to connect with your social media teams and just give them content they can share on the web. Especially if they're used to only seeing reports that are mainly text. This kind of thing can be really exciting to a lot of different people. Thank you, Shu. I'll dive into some of the other tips in a little bit, but I really appreciate the context.
Thank you, Chris.
Jan, are you on? I think I'm too fast for Rita, but
Yes, I am. I think, yeah, she's not coming till 3:30.
yes,
So
I am too fast. And that's my problem. But do you want to just give me a little bit of context about this one?
yeah,
What?
yeah. This is our infographic that we use to share information with our stakeholders about our PDMP, which we call MAPS, Michigan Automated Prescription System. And this was kind of a carryover from the previous cooperative agreement called Data-Driven Prevention Initiative. And when we came into the new cooperative agreement, OD2A, we all of a sudden had a whole new team working with us, which is a surveillance team. And so Rita Saith, who is kind of our connection with that team, put this particular infographic together. And she did a lot more detail than we had done in the past. We had just had a 2-pager before, and kind of focusing on the 19 indicators that we were sharing, with the DDPI program, and now continuing to do so here. What we haven't done yet is try to figure out what our stakeholders are doing with this, especially with this more information here. So I'm hoping that when Rita comes on, she'll be able to explain some of the additional stuff that she's done. But that's basically the overview of what we've been doing with this infographic.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And yeah, if Rita comes on, I'll try to pull her back if we can get back to here. But I want to share it in context while I was here. I will say that like I said earlier, infographics come in all shapes and sizes. They come in all. This one was actually created in Word, right, Jan? So it's they get created in all sorts of tools. So I've seen them in Publisher, Word, and PowerPoint. You see a lot of infographics get created in things like Canva or Adobe Illustrator. InDesign, there are so many tools that can create infographics. There are also a whole bunch of web tools out there that also create infographics. So you see them all over the place like that too. So and sometimes the infographics are blended with lots of other material too. So like one of the reasons I wanted to share this one that Jan shared with me and that Rita created is that just because you're doing an infographic doesn't mean you have to take away all that extra detailed text. Maybe it's the case that it can be the case that you'll share something and people will only read the visuals and they'll only look at the pictures, and that's fine. But you can also give the text. You can have it in these kind of formats. It doesn't mean that there's no hard set rule that it has to be on a 8.5 by 11 page, front side, no back, anything like that. We can do a whole lot of different things with infographics. But let's just talk about some of the different styles to give you a sense of what you can create. These are kind of like the infographic tropes. They're just kind of like these common things that you can do to create an infographic that would work pretty well to reach somebody. The first one that you see often is what I call like, it's kind of like a presentation style. It's this idea where you have these little chunks, these little like slides. And this is almost like Shu's earlier, where it kind of takes you through one bit to the next bit, to the next bit, to the next bit. It's kind of like you're delivering a presentation about something. But instead of standing in front of it and then going slide by slide, you just take your slides and you do straight top to bottom and you roll it out in a graphic form. Um, and you write it in a way that people can read it even if you're not standing in front of it. So that's one style. Another style is a timeline. So if you have a timeline, what's going on in history, the timeline itself creates a narrative, and it tells a story from back in the past to today. And you can mix in words, you can mix in descriptions, interview materials. You can sometimes for qualitative timelines work really well, because a lot of our qualitative information when you're doing interviews with subjects or people of any type, the information doesn't necessarily come in chronological order. So sometimes a timeline can be really useful in that way. You can also feed in data, and if you're looking at a program over time, a timeline can work really well as a backdrop for an infographic. We saw a lot of maps, and we saw a couple in the ones that I showed earlier. When you're dealing with any kind of program that has a geography tint, putting together a map, a map with like little colored boxes and then annotating that map can make for a really nice infographic. You can layer, you can take a chart and have that chart be the overview. So that chart I showed you earlier when we were doing the quiz, where you had the kind of overall and then you had the breakdown, those work really well kind of in tandem. So if you put an overall and then you have the breakdown, so in this case, there's a pie chart that's the overall, and then you have the breakdown of the different categorical elements and more data. It feels natural, like you're seeing the overall and then you're diving into the data. So that can also make a really nice one. Chances are most infographics I see get created are created alongside other reports. So if you already have another report, what you can do is you can very specifically use the infographic to create a kind of visual index for your report, including adding on page numbers, so that when you share it out, you share it alongside your report. Then people can look through the visual report index style and then pick spots where they can go into your regular report to find more information about it. You can even take it one step further and you can find a template for a restaurant menu, because there's billions of them out there. And then just use that restaurant menu template to be your infographic. This works really well too. People are used to it. You can go dashboard style. So, okay, you have a bunch of indicators. You can create it like it's a dashboard, even though it's only a report that comes out once a year, but you can give it that same kind of look to give an overview of where your programs are on certain indicators. Major one we see a lot of times is collage style. You just have a whole bunch of data, you kind of piece it together. Shiva, I guess this is probably more like kind of how yours came together. It's like, what data elements are we trying to share with this specific group of people? And how can we pull that together into an infographic? Comic style is one of my favorites. So you write it like a comic book. And in that, those little lines, and one thing to know about comic books is you can really play with time. That each little box, you can have it go over time, you can have it be at one point in time, or you can jump all around. And there's some interesting books out there about how to create comics that by Scott McCloud that actually work just as well for infographics. The lessons behind comic design work really well for infographics. And when you think about it, social media is usually presented in a way that it's almost like a comic book of life as it goes on at this moment. Now we have an annotated chart. So we talked about the map. Maybe you have a really good chart. One really good chart, and then you annotate it, you add a whole bunch of other descriptive information, makes a fantastic infographic. And you'll see this a lot. So if you have a really cool chart, well, just center it, focus on it, and it can become a star. Or then small multiples, which is kind of like we saw that New York Times one before, where you have the same kind of chart repeated over and over and over again for different localities. So let's say in your state, if you created a small chart for every single county, and then you put them all together on the same page, that works really well as an infographic too. As you can see, there's just like a billion ways to create infographics. There are diagrams, there's like timelines, people create pathways, and they use visual metaphors sometimes, and then just kind of put text all around the visual metaphors. But really what we're trying to do is just take information that's usually presented in one way and change the way that we present it so that we can reach a specific audience that is looking for that information, so that we can bring them to the data. All right, let's talk about defeating the hippo, because it is a big challenge. So I don't know, does anybody know what the hippo is? And if you do, go ahead and say so in the chat. And it's okay if you don't, because I don't even remember where I heard the term, but I think it makes a lot of sense, and you'll get it in a minute. All right, so this is a bad chart, right? It is some kind of donut chart that's 3D. Never make anything 3D. It just distorts all your data. That's all it does. And it doesn't look cool enough to justify distorting all your data. It pretty much goes in general. But what happens if your boss loves that chart? And this happens a lot, where the boss loves the chart that distorts the data. Okay, that goes into the report. And that's the challenge. The hippo is the highest paid person's opinion. And the last thing we want to do is have the highest paid person's opinion determining what goes out as our report and what stays in. And if we don't have a process, that's what happens. So you versus the hippo is going to win most of the time, unless they really trust you, and then, that might not happen. But if you take actual data from users, from people who use this thing, and put that against the hippo, the users usually win. So the idea is, we're not trying to say it's you versus your boss. That's never going to be a battle you want to fight most of the time. Every once in a while you want to pick those, but not most of the time. But what you want to do is have a process that externalizes yourself, externalizes your boss, and puts the people that you're writing your report for in the focus. These are the people that we're trying to reach. Let's see how they respond to these reports. What questions do they ask? And as evaluators, this information can be really, really kind of nice. So data design, as the way I see it, is a process that we administer. It's not like, okay, I'm going to create an awesome chart. I've had plenty of awesome charts shot down by people who didn't like them. I've had charts that I thought would work, just totally fail against some really ugly thing, because that ugly thing was more somebody was really used to Excel, so they liked their thing in Excel. They don't want to see it in a PDF. That didn't make any sense to them. And that's okay. If we understand that this is a process that we're administering, we don't have to get so tied into what it is that we're creating that it is the only thing that we worry about. So I tend to blend user experience design, human-centered design with evaluation data and data visualization. So there are a lot of methodologies and other pieces that I tend to draw from. But this process works pretty well, and it's only 6 steps. And I find that it can be useful in all sorts of things, especially something like infographic creation. So the first thing is to do, and you can run through this really quickly. It doesn't have to be something that takes like days, weeks, months, anything. You can just, I tend to jot all this stuff down on pieces of paper, even if it's just doing my own stuff. So the first thing we want is a brief. We want to understand what is our design challenge or design opportunity. What are we trying to do when we're creating an infographic? That is step 1. And don't worry, this is being recorded and I'll share all the slides. So if you don't have to jot down notes or anything, it's okay. Step 2 is data user profile. So you remember those little people I showed, and just like a very basic description about who they are, what they're looking for. Having that in hand is incredibly useful when trying to create an infographic, because if you think through that, you can have a more focused infographic than if you just go into your data, try to create something, and then think about the audience later. The other good thing about both the brief and this and everything else is that at every one of these stages, you can share it with a team, you can share it with a boss and get sign off before moving on to the next level. So if you need to extend out the process or you're trying to work with a big group, this really helps design together as a collective rather than just as an individual, which tends to be where a lot of the issues and challenges happen. Step 3 is usually exploratory data analysis. If you're just trying to create some kind of report based on data, oftentimes with infographics is getting, oftentimes, I'm sorry, I just got another weird question. This is the problem with trying to do everything at once. Can somebody take the sorry about this, everybody. I just need to participants. Oh, I apologize. Kelly, I can't get in there right now. So I'm sorry about that. All right. Exploratory data analysis is less of a factor when you're working on infographics, because usually there's a report as a starting point. Most of the time we have a pretty firm understanding of what it is that we're trying to communicate to people. If you're just working off data sets, you can create infographics just off of a data set. And then you'll want to do an exploratory data analysis step where you're just trying to figure out what would be useful to those people that you profiled. Then I like adding a mood board step. And mood boarding, if you ever watch like a interior design show, they always show up with mood boards with like all their fabric patterns and other things. You can do the same things. Basically, we just want examples of what is this thing going to look like when we're done with it. Shu, when you shared yours, this is why when somebody has an example of something they can do, then they get asked to do it a lot more because they have something they can show that people get. It's hard for people to understand infographics without being able to have an idea of what you're talking about. So if you can show examples, that works really well. Examples, color schemes, other infographics that exist that have these kind of elements that you want to pull together, and then getting people to sign off on that really, really kind of helps. After that, I might do a wireframe or prototype. That graphic I showed before, the interactive one, definitely started as a wireframe. I had a whole bunch of ideas coming to me from the team. That was the team created one. So we created a little sketch about what it would look like prior to actually going in and creating it. These kind of steps, even though they're extra steps, from what people usually do when they just dive in and start trying to create stuff. Um, these little steps save so much time later on, because again, you're going to get people to sign off and then nobody's going to be surprised by what you create. You can also user test any of these steps. And then finally, we're going to pull it all together and create the data product. Again, it's like 6 steps, but you could run through these 6 steps on your own in an hour if you're just trying to create your own stuff. But you know, you can take more time and you can run through it as a team and you can work on it as a team, which is really helpful. So I do this with pretty much all my designs and it works really well. And the step infinite, so this is the extra step that just occurs, is anytime if something's really important, you want to user test it. You just want to share it with people that can try it out and tell you the obvious things that you're likely forgetting or missing. So the more you test with real users, the better the product. So the more you can test and go through iterations, likely each iteration will probably make it a little bit better. You know, there's no hard and fast rule for that. Sometimes, even if you're just doing it internally with your own team, what you do is you give your team members the profiles that you created early on, and you say to them, pretend you're this person and you're reading this. And be that person reading this report. What are you seeing? What are you not seeing? And that can be really helpful. So I have some practical tools and tips, but I want to give everybody opportunities, because we're already at like 3:43, to go ahead and ask any questions that you have about infographics. I know one is probably going to be, what do we use to create them? And that's okay, but go ahead and ask them in the chat. I would love that. And I will sit for a second. Somebody has to have a question. And I encourage anybody who might have a question, to enter it. I'll take another gap in a second because I'm going to keep asking until people do or until they leave. So, but in terms of tips, one tip that while questions come in would be to layering your data helps put the data into context. So those 2 charts that I was like, this or this, if you back them one after the other, it works so well in terms of design. So let's see. Now we have some questions. Thank you. Desiree, how can we streamline data or info so there is more white space and the sheet is not as crowded? That's a good question. One of the challenges that people have when they dive into doing design is that they think about all the stuff that they want to share with somebody, and they put all the stuff without understanding that without really connecting to the fact that that person that you're trying to reach to is only going to be able to ingest so much. One of the ways I do that is, I don't know if you've ever used Canva, but I use Canva all the time at canva.com. It's, for those who don't know, it's a free tool, free-ish. It's freemium in that there are royalty-free images, like $10 a month to get the full thing. But you can do pretty much everything with the free version. Starting with templates, templates give you a good idea of what you can create and what it would look like. So you pull up a template that has a lot of white space and you're like, this looks really nice. Look at how much information can actually fit on that page that you think looks nice. actually take the character counts, take the charts. You're like, look, we can only have, if we want it to look like this, we can only have 3 charts and 200 characters, or 700 characters. If we go over that, it's not going to look like that. So you use that to end up giving yourself character counts and other things, and set yourself up like you're an editor at a newspaper and say, look, we only have 1,000 words. We don't have, we can't go on forever. And that can work. And especially doing the mood board pieces where you're pulling out examples, or doing the prototypes where you're showing what something's going to look like. That's really how you can integrate white space in a way that would be useful. Jan, we would like to evaluate whether our stakeholders are actually using the infographics we are giving them. Yes, and you should. You should, if you can, especially if it's something that you're creating. What I like to do with user testing is really just to get somebody on the phone, or on Zoom, have them screen share the item with them, ask them how they respond to it, ask them to read it aloud or do that kind of thing. You can really find a lot of information. Or if it's something that you've been giving out, ask them if they've actually seen it. If they haven't seen it, maybe it's not connecting with the people that you're trying to reach. And if you're clear on the audience that you're trying to reach, it's easier to do user testing. If you can't figure out who you're going to user test, maybe you're not so clear on the audience you're trying to reach, because it means you can't even put names you can't even put the names down, so you don't know who to reach to. So understanding those people in the first place, that profile version is useful in saying that we are actually reaching an audience. We're not just making our information visual and hoping that it'll somehow reach an audience. We're thinking very specifically about our audience. Okay, May, what if your audience varies? And chances are they're going to a lot. And I would say it depends on how much, how important it is to share with these different audiences. You're going to have to, prioritize certain audiences over other audiences. And that happens all the time. But be very specific and intentional about the audiences that you're trying to reach out to, and you don't have to create just one infographic. You can create 3 different versions built for 3 different audiences that are largely the same, but just tailored to meet different audiences. Especially in something like Canva, where you can just copy and paste the pages over and over again, you can tailor it pretty quickly, as long as you have the base fundamental things. So the idea is you really want to try to match your infographics with the audiences. It's not like you can only have one infographic, one report. The idea is you have an infographic for whatever audience you're trying to communicate something specific to, and based on how much information you can connect there. How do we deal with Section 8 compliance and the need for screen readers? What I like about good data visualization practice is good data visualization practice, it makes accessibility easier than harder. In that, if you're sitting there thinking about an audience, thinking about a chart and who you're trying to reach with that chart and the message that chart is supposed to tell, then you should be able to come up with a narrative description about what you're trying to do as a specific chart. It's not like we're used to these kind of like Section 508 checklists and other things. But when you start diving into Section 508 and dealing with compliance issues, and disabled readers, viewing with screen readers, that kind of thing, thinking about those people, the philosophical point is you're trying to you're trying to make something available to them that would not be available to somebody who can't see. So if you can really describe and write a narrative version of that, then you use alt text and a narrative on your narrative description, and you find ways to share all the data in ways that are useful. So you want to tell the story, but then also create avenues. And a lot of times for highly visual places, usually you create you can sometimes create second versions. And that's why even like tools like Tableau and others have these, like the way in which they're set up, that you can see full data sets or other things, or there are these alternative things that go alongside it. Will the recording of this webinar be shared? Yes, it will be shared. And no worries about getting in. I know there were a few challenges, and sorry for anybody who's had any challenge getting into this. Awesome. I see other people. Yes, there is a nonprofit free pro account for Canva. What are some things we should avoid doing when making an infographic? The biggest thing to avoid doing is with any kind of creative effort. I see this happen a lot where somebody kind of dives in and they try to do something that's really super creative or interesting. They get into it and they share it, and the person they share it with doesn't like it, and they lose all creative confidence. And creative confidence is so easy to dash, and bosses do it all the time without meaning to, but they do it. And just like teachers do this in the past too, and especially in data people are really highly educated. There are more creative confidence issues in other places I go to speak. Evaluators, people who read a lot and write a lot, creative confidence is a huge challenge. So what shouldn't you do? Be too hard on yourself. Try to take yourself, create a process that you can follow through, and pull yourself out of that process as much as possible, and create something together with a group of people designed to meet the needs of other people. The more you can get into doing that, kind of externalizing the process and understanding that even some very basic visuals, that people are so used to just getting reports with words and words and words. You just give them a few pictures and they're going to be happier. It doesn't have to look like what the New York Times pulls out to be useful to an audience. Modern visual reports are magazines, not novels. People aren't reading them from the beginning to the end. They're flipping through them, they're skimming it, that kind of thing. So this is another general basic point. Find a template that's a magazine template, follow a magazine template and create a report like that. People would be happier because they can bounce around. You can have an O magazine that's 200 pages and you can have a journal article that's 10. The O magazine is going to be easier to read. It's not about length. It's about visual accessibility. Magazines are way better at that than reports and other things tend to be. Translating infographics into other languages. Just like any other kind of translation issues, the ideas are what you want to do is make sure you're using some kind of layered file tool that you're not having to create your charts over and over and over again. So you'll create your charts, and then with the text, you're going to have text boxes that can then be changed. So meaning there is something you can do in Canva, and you can do it in other tools too, but you can do it in Canva and you can save it as a PowerPoint. And if you save your visual, if you save your overall visual piece, and then use text boxes over top of that that can be changed, then you can adapt it over and over again into other languages. So that tends to be one way to do that. The idea is just to use some kind of layered file. Adobe XD is another tool that's free. And it's easier to get into than something like Illustrator. Whoops, that was not to everybody, sent it to everyone. Adobe XD is another tool that you might want to look up if you're really getting into this and you want a vector tool, so that you can start doing things in layers and start doing things that can expand and not lose visual quality. There's so many places you can go to learn about infographics. People have different ideas about them. Just be very focused. You're trying to serve an audience. And that's pretty much it. A couple more things. Charts or illustrations. You don't have to repeat what you put in the chart in the text. You want the chart and the text to support each other. I always like this Maurice Sendak quote. You must never illustrate exactly what is written. You must find a space in the text so that the pictures can do the work. Then you must let the words take over where the words do best. Funny kind of juggling act. Um, just because it's an infographic doesn't mean it's all graphics. You can mix text, you can write narrative, you can go back and forth between narrative and pictures. Um, Take it slow. If you're having a hard time processing information, don't try to put everything into the same chart. Just talk about it over and over again. Just repeat it and then highlight different areas, and then you can kind of roll through things slower. Um, the idea is try to think about your audience being not a captive one, but the person just walking around on their phone like this. That's who you're trying to reach. So you have to kind of slowly go through. Remember that everybody's overwhelmed, and you'll make a better infographic. Um, Try to keep it fun. Don't just suck all the fun out. It's okay to be fun. It's okay to have silly graphics in there. That's okay. Somebody might not like it. That's why you do user testing. If your users like it, then you'll be better off anyway. This is all part of externalizing the process. People like fun things, just in general. Even in places where you don't think they like fun things, they tend to like fun things. Um, if you're ever having a hard time getting something past that nobody's really that interested in, give two choices. I do this with charts all the time. I give two chart options. What's the best chart for this? I don't know. Here, try these two charts. One tells the story this way, one tells the story this way. Which one do you like better? If you like something, you want to try something new, try it the old way and the new way, show them both. It takes a little bit of extra time, but if you can get it through, you can tend to do the stuff that you like more often. Again, canva.com. Uh, this is a good place to find templates. There are infographic templates on here, but infographic template, you can use poster templates, you can use Twitter templates, you can use presentations. Remember, infographics can be anything. You can create infographic movies. You can do that on Canva too. It tends to be really easy. So that's why I use it a whole bunch. Because in pretty much all the graphics that I use for this community, I create through Canva. Jan is asking, would it be helpful to have a place on our platform where our infographics are shared with the rest of the community? This is a question not for me, but for everybody else. So think about that. I'll just flash this up. Knowing I was going to do this this presentation, I also created a blog post last week. So at freshspectrum.com, what is an infographic? You'll find a post that kind of walks you through some of these options. It'll also give you some other places where you can find examples. Okay. Chris, you may have already answered this, but are the terms infographics and visualizations interchangeable? It's like all these things, infographics, visualizations, charts, people throw them out all over the place. It's hard to tell the difference. So yeah, they are used interchangeably. I think infographics, because they came out of design, if you ever go into a bookstore, look for design books, you'll find the weirdest, wackiest books. They're all different shapes and sizes with different fonts and papers and everything. Well, the same thing goes with the way infographics are out in the world. That's why it's so hard to pin them down. But yeah, infographics, visualizations, it all depends on the people that you're talking about and talking to. Some people have real firm ideas about what these are. I tend to think they vary so much by different audiences. I've worked with too many different audiences to really care that much. It's really about showing pictures and saying, this is what I'm talking about. That's the easiest way to go about doing something. This is what I like. So finding examples is usually the way to go. It looks like we're at 4. I spent a lot of time talking. I hope this was useful. I'm seeing some good comments in the chat, so thank you all for that. I will be sharing the recording, and yeah, I appreciate it, everyone. This hasn't been one of those super interactive ones like past ones, but I hope it was useful. And we'll look for next time. And we still need new ideas for next time around. Jan, did you want to say anything else to close out, or are you good?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Chris. That was super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. And yes, thank you both, Jan and Rita and Chu, for sharing your infographics with us too. That was also useful. And I hope everybody has a great week, and we'll see you again next month. All right, bye, everyone.